Alright, bitches, let's talk about witches. I'm not keeping that in.
Half the battle of having powers is believing you do. That's why covens have always been important.
The Craft Legacy is the newest film from Blumhouse, directed by Zoe Lister-Jones. It stars Kaylee Spaney, Gideon Adlin, Lovie Simone, and Zoe Luna, and it tells the story of Lily, a young woman who moves to a new town with her mother, and discovers her penchant for magic when she meets a coven of 3 young witches in her school. So before we get into The Craft Legacy, let's talk a bit of background on The Craft. The Craft is a woefully underappreciated movie from 1996, starring Robin Tooney, Fairuza Balk, Neve Campbell, and Rachel True, and is essentially the 90s captured on film. Every single element of this movie, from its soundtrack to its dialogue to its costuming, is perfectly reflective of an entire subculture of the 90s. It's all overly grungy and needlessly edgy, and it defines the entire goth subculture of that era. It features an excellent performance from all of its leading ladies, specifically Fairuza Balk, who is just absolutely unhinged in her role as Nancy. And honestly, I think this character may have inspired the aesthetic of several people that I know in my real life now, not naming any names. The point is, The Craft is a pretty iconic film that ended up defining an entire niche subculture of a generation. And I think that's awesome. Its depiction of witchcraft is mostly accurate to my knowledge, at least for the most part, and it summarized an entire niche group of people in a quote that I think we can all relate to on some level.
We are the weirdos, mister.
Sure, it's a little messy and the characterization is a little inconsistent, but it's so of its time and so batshit crazy that I can't help but love it. And if I were reviewing it, I would say that it's solid. But we're not here to talk about The Craft, we're here to talk about The Craft Legacy, a film that, honestly, until very recently, I didn't even know was happening when it was being described as a remake/reboot of The Craft. And I was a little surprised / a lot concerned when I found out it was just dropping straight on Prime. The trailer dropped and I wasn't really wowed by it. Honestly, it just left me confused more than anything because it seemed to acknowledge the events of the first film by acknowledging Nancy, but at the same time it seemed to just be rehashing the entire plot of the first film beat for beat. New girl moves to town, joins a coven, they get in over their heads, rinse, repeat. Thankfully though, that's not the case, and the trailer for this movie woefully mismarketed it. I can confirm for you now that it is a sequel. Is it a good sequel? That's a different story. The Craft Legacy is a film that is definitively not for me. I am not its intended audience. What this movie wants to be, essentially, is a retelling of The Craft for a new generation. This is The Craft, but for Gen Z. It leans far more into young adult vibes than the edgy, gothy horror flick of the 90s. It's an okay requel of The Craft. What I really appreciated about it, though, is that it does enough to differentiate itself from the original movie and does a lot more than the lackluster trailer led me to believe it would. As a young adult teen drama with some heavy witchy vibes and an intense focus on LGBTQ+ themes, it's pretty fun. The performances are good, specifically from our 4 main witches, who at the very least have amazing chemistry together. They're not always written the strongest, but the way that they play off each other is very charming, and the way it updates The Craft for a new generation of goths and witches and queers is awesome. Seeing these girls use their newfound power as a means of achieving community and social justice is awesome, and I love that we don't just get the same struggle with power that we got from Nancy in the first movie. But that's kind of where the problems come in, because when it comes to plot, Legacy is kind of a mess, but not in the way that the first one was messy. The problem with The Craft Legacy is that its pacing is very weird. When we start off this movie, we're basically just getting a rehash of everything we know about magic from the first movie for anyone who's uninitiated. And by the time Lily then becomes acquainted with her newfound power and joins this coven, we are subjected to way too much screen time of the girls just fucking around with their powers. And don't get me wrong, that's a fun thing to watch, especially in a movie like this, but it gets to a point where it feels like the movie forgets that it was supposed to have a plot or a conflict until the last 20 minutes or so. As a result, everything that follows is pretty rushed, and while it does lead to an ultimately satisfying conclusion that will please fans of the original film, the path it takes to get there is clumsy, to say the least. But like I said, I am not the intended audience for this movie. It's certainly more catered to young adult fans and Gen Z kids, and it definitely caters to them more than to fans of the original Craft. But for fans of the original, I think there's a definite bit in here to keep you pleased. Like I said, I certainly was pleased by the directions it takes toward the end. It may not have been my cup of tea, but it's definitely watchable and it doesn't besmirch the legacy of the original by any means. I'm gonna say that The Craft Legacy is meh, It's a decent one-time watch, but it is not frightening, and I absolutely don't recommend to anyone watch it for the robbery of $20 that it's being posted for right now on VOD. If you want to wait for the price to drop and then check it out, I would recommend doing that. If you like the original, you might dig this one. I don't know. If nothing else, I do think it'll turn other people onto the original, so it's a net positive all around. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel and you want to see more, click down there, like, comment, subscribe. 31 Nights Till Halloween is almost over, so you can still get in on that if you want. Patreon link is down in the description. If you want to join my $5 tier or higher, you can get access to my Discord where we've been watching movies. And after this month, I am going to make the movie watches a monthly thing because daily is insane and I can't do that, but monthly, that's doable. So if you want to be like any of these cool people right here, please consider donating. I would really appreciate it. You can get all sorts of cool new rewards, anything from access to my Discord to gifts sent right to your door once a month. If any of that interests you, please consider donating. I would really appreciate it, but even if you don't, thank you so much for watching anyway, and I will see you all very soon.
Careful, a lot of weirdos out here.
We are the weirdos, mister.